Before we start, let's pray. Lord, please speak through me so that the words may be a light unto our path, that others may see you. We are your humble servants, standing before all. I pray that the words of our mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Speak your testimony. In Psalm 71:15, David states, "My mouth will tell of your righteous deeds, of your saving acts all the days long, though I know not how to relate them all." What does this text convey? Speak your testimony. Let's start with an introduction. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jeff, and I'm usually found in the background serving in the audiovisual department. Well, that's where I'm most comfortable. As you see, I'm a little nervous up here today. Some, including my wife, whom I love and respect so dearly, are probably wondering the same thing you might be wondering. Truth be told, I'm wondering if I should be here as well. Why? Because I'm totally out of my comfort zone. So I did have to read through Psalm 71:15 again. But we'll continue reading through to verse 18. I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone. O God, from my youth you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. So even to old age and gray hair, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your power to the next generations, your mighty acts to all those to come. But in light of the previous text, I would also like to highlight 1 Peter 2:21, the NIV. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving an example so that you might follow in his footsteps. Wow. But to make this text even clearer, the New Living Testimony transition says, God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his footsteps. So I can clearly say these scriptures are what? A call to action. Speak your testimony.
I've gotten the most beautiful pleasure to see how God's hands moved in my life. When I was going to college, I went in and I went to study criminal justice, which is what I majored in, is what my bachelor's was in. And when I got that degree, the purpose was for me to find some way to serve. And so as I was figuring out where God was trying to take me, where I could see God's hand moving in my life, I started transitioning and thinking, we were in Florida at the time, and I thought to myself, the juvenile probation officer looks like a great job. It's a great way for me to get in, be able to serve, the youth, the troubled youth that was in there. And so I took this job, and when I got in, I came in with a mindset of the changes that I was going to be able to make and how I was going to be able to impact. And perhaps in my time there, I may not, I'm not exactly sure. But I went in and I started seeing a lot of these youth that were troubled. These youth that were committing crimes, they were getting into trouble out in their communities. They were stealing from people. They were holding families and mothers and even other children at gunpoint, doing heinous crimes. And I was watching this, and I was trying to ask God multiple times, Lord, what am I doing here? How do I stop this? How do I change a child from the environment they're in? And all I could do as I was continuously doing that is just continue praying for each and every juvenile that I was working with. Some of them changed for the better. Some of them continued down paths that led them absolutely in terrible directions. Some even were led to as far as even death. But it's the reality of the world that we live in. And in that environment, I was seeing what it was like to see a home that was absent of God. A home that was struggling, of families that couldn't keep it together, fathers that were leaving, mothers that were leaving, whichever the situation was. It was just a terrible situation to see what some of the conditions were for some of these juveniles. It was almost as if there was just no hope for them from the start. As I worked there and did what I could, I started thinking about, God, where do you want me next? What's the possible next step in my life? And I decided I was going to do something fun, and decided to go work at the jail instead with the adults. And I was not a correction officer. I worked inside the jail. I dealt with inmates. I was not an officer in the sense that, I wasn't arresting them or in some cases getting physical or anything like that. That was not my responsibility. And so many times I've got to see, again, more people that were coming in, dealing with multiple things, from drugs, from just, things that had to do with a lot of addiction, homes that were being broken by domestic violence, murders, folks that, were unfortunately hurting children in many ways. And again, God was showing me what a life looks like absent of God. And I'm not saying that, that if you don't have God in your life, that this is exactly what you're going to turn into. But it was a good example to see exactly how God was showing me things, and the way that people were being changed and hurt, and the way people were leading the lives that they were living. It was so interesting to see it through their lens. But something started happening to me while I was working there. When I first came in again with the mindset of, I'm going to try to help in any way I can. And eventually what started happening to me is I started becoming desensitized. Every person that came into that jail, I just saw just as a number. I didn't see them as a human being anymore. I started losing compassion for people. I could care less about the story or the situations you were going through, or that your family member passed away recently and this is what got you here. I didn't care what was going on in your life. I wanted to just do my job, get you moved on, and I move on right to the next one. And then I started seeing that's what I was becoming. I was becoming someone that I didn't recognize, someone that I didn't want to be. Someone that was not compassionate, someone that didn't care about people. And if most of you that have gotten to know me, you guys see a very jovial person, very great to get along with and things like that. But and I am those things, but I started seeing what I was becoming. And I went to God, and it's like, God, this is messing with who I am down to the core. For the person that I am, my character, the person that I really want to be, I can't be that here, Lord. And so it's like, where is it that you're going to, what do you want from me now? Where do I go now? And I started flipping through Instagram, and as you know, you get ads on Instagram and things pop up and everything. And all of a sudden, I stopped at this boot camp ad that came up to do a sales training and go into sales. And so I looked up the program. I spoke with my wife about it, and I said, hey, I think this is where my next journey, like where I can get out of this environment, I can be somewhere better. more mentally stable type of situations. And so I looked at the program, I did it, and signed up for it. And my wife was in fear, as I was as well. I started looking and seeing, wow, I am potentially going to do this program and then finish it with the potential to get hired somewhere else, but I'm going to leave stability. I'm going to leave a job that I know is always going to be there, because unfortunately the world we live in is crazy. There's going to be criminals all the time. People are always going to get arrested. Like, I had job security set, and I was going somewhere where anything can happen. And so we prayed about it, we put it in God's hands, and we decided, let's move forward. Let's just go ahead. And, my wife, being the loving wife that she is, she saw what was happening to me with my character. She saw the things that I was going through. And so she said, let's do it. So I did it. I completed the program. And then it was a program about 2 months. After I completed it, I then ended up getting was blessed to get hired within 17 days after completing the program. So I was removed out of that environment. I was now working from home, completely different from what I was used to. And I did that job for a bit, and the CEO at the time was a major blessing in my life. After I was there for about 11 months, the company was just going through some difficult transitions. It was hard for him to consider promoting me. And so when I thought this guy was just going to let me go, he literally tells me, he said, Edgar, he's like, you've been the best. He's like, here's what I want you to do. He's like, just go and apply for work. And don't worry about your job. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to keep paying you until you find something. He's like, but don't worry about the work here. Just do what you can here, but for the most part, just apply. So I did that, and he connected me to another company. When I landed that job at this company, one of the things that they said in the interview to me, and we were living in Florida at the time, he said, Edgar, have you ever thought about maybe considering moving to Charlotte, North Carolina? Because we want the sales team to be in-house and here in person. And of course, when you're in an interview, and I've done a few interviews at this time, and I was looking for a job. I couldn't wait any longer. And I just kind of, before even speaking to my wife, I said, yeah, I can move to North Carolina. I said, just give me a second, though. I got a lease. I got to finish that up. And then after that, we can move. And so I finished the call. I was with the CEO, and I just was I was kind of thinking to myself in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, how do I tell my wife? How do I tell Jess? Like, this is going to be crazy. This cannot be, like, we had moved from Las Vegas. We've been in Florida for 10 years, and we thought Florida was going to be it. We weren't going to go anywhere. And it's funny how God does things, man, because obviously here I am. But I was like, what am I going to tell her? So literally, I go to Jess, and I say, honey, so this is the situation. I said, great job. It's going to be good. But we got to move to Charlotte, North Carolina. That's the only way we could do this. And she literally she kind of like held her breath. She gasped, and she said, "You have no idea that I've been praying as to where God is going to take us next, and I thought North Carolina, and I wrote it in my journal." And when she said that, it's emotional for me to think about it right now, because it's just like when you see God's hand move so real like that, it is just absolutely unbelievable. And so we did it. We finished our lease, we came to Florida, and then at that time we were thinking, well, okay, we got to find a church. And I got to tell you guys this because it's funny, but our pastor back in Orlando, his son actually attends the academy. I'm going to butcher it. Pisgah, am I saying that right? Yeah. So he attends Pisgah, and I was expecting my pastors to be super supportive and say, Edgar, I'm going to pray for you guys. You guys are going to do great in Charlotte. And the first thing he said to me is like, you're not finding a church in Charlotte, Edgar. I'm sorry. If you think you're going to go over there and find something like this church or whatever the case is, like, you're not finding it out there. There's just no churches. There's no churches in Charlotte. My son goes to Pisgah there, and he says the churches are dying. And I said, okay. I said, thanks, Pastor. I appreciate the support. And so we left. We said we started looking at churches online from Florida. We saw some of Pursue, and saw what Pursue was doing. I was like, wow, that's a pretty cool church. Saw university, and we kind of came over here. We try to do what we can to find our church. And it was hard. That first year we got here, it was difficult. We came to Pursuit one time or two times. We left, and then we did like a long hiatus, and we were gone for months because we just didn't know where we wanted to be. We were depressed. You know, you kind of have that mourning period from your home. You know, you start missing things. But my wife, you know, being the warrior that she is spiritually, she just, you know, we got together and she's like, we need to just start going to church. You know, we can't keep doing this. Like, I started prioritizing other things that were more important in my life. Like, we were just going to try to live Sabbaths, you know, out in a park somewhere, just chilling, whatever the case was. But God is so amazing because we started coming back. And we started getting ourselves involved. Danny had a few amazing potlucks at his house with amazing people, amazing food, and all of those things brought us together. And the one thing that really, really stood out to us with Pursuit is that when we were in our old church, one of the things we were missing was community, because it was very easy for us to get to that church on Saturdays, and then after church, everyone just goes home. That's all it was, and we were missing community, and so. Next thing you know, we started coming. We started involving ourselves more. Next thing I know, it was a potluck this week and a potluck that weekend, and inviting people over to our house, doing a lot of fun things. And that is what God gave us coming to Pursuit. And so this church holds a special place for my wife and I in our hearts, and it's been an absolute major blessing to be here. But those are the things I just kind of want to remind you of how God will watch over you and protect you. And although it may seem at the moment that God doesn't have a plan for you, and although it may seem like there's a storm that you're dealing with and you'll never see the end of that or the light at the end of the tunnel, I promise you that light is there. You just got to keep on going through the storm. Sometimes what God does is he creates these situations in our lives. He creates these challenges and these difficulties. It's because we're diamonds in the rough. And it's because we have something to show for. We have a light within us to shine. And so when God brings you through those difficulties and those challenges, it's like a callus. If you play guitar or guys here that lift weights, when you build that callus, guess what? At first, when you're lifting those heavy weights, your hands start hurting, you know, because you're gripping, the grip is tight, your hands are soft. But what happens when your hands start building those calluses? It's like that weight becomes, you don't feel it as much on your hand. It doesn't hurt anymore. And so that's what God is doing and preparing each and every one of us. He's building those calluses on us so that we can be stronger as we move forward and as we bring others to his feet. So if I can leave you guys with a verse, Psalms 121 says, "The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over you coming and going, both now and forevermore." Amen. So with that, I say, speak your testimony.
Wow. What a powerful display of God leading us to the next step, to the next stage of our existence. Wow. Well, looking back on Psalm 71:16, David goes on to say, "I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone." So, if David is saying, speak publicly what God is doing in my life, I can tell you he is my rock and my salvation. A little bit about my family, a little bit of backstory. In the past 5 years, death has consumed my family. First, my mother, the matriarch of our family of 7, passed away at the age of 82. My mother, Daisy P. Swinton, was an outstanding friend, leader, and mentor to everyone she came in contact with. My mother was a true example of leading by example. She served in the medical field, like so many of us here I know are serving as well. Her first job was, I think it's called a candy striper at Huntsville Hospital, where she would deliver books and packages to to the people who were there at the hospital who were receiving mail and whatnot. That's where she found her passion to serve in the nursing field, completing 40 years of service, ending her career as nurse manager. Huntsville Hospital, at her death, established the Daisy P. Swinton Scholarship to assist working students while pursuing their nursing dreams. My mother was the first African American woman to become nurse manager at Huntsville Hospital. So that was back in the mid-60s. So, if you're ever in need of intensive care while visiting Huntsville, Alabama, you'll find a portrait of my mom hanging there in the ICU dedicated to in her honors. So what my mother taught me in my life was perseverance. From a young age, she was an example of not giving up in what you believe. She would say things to me like, "You're going to be my minister." I don't know what that meant. But what I didn't know at that time was that she was speaking providence over my life. My mom would say other things like, "Whatever you lay your hands to do, let it glorify God." I miss my mother deeply. To know my mom was to know she prayed for her children every day and every night, especially on Wednesday night prayer meeting, when she always would say, "Pray a special prayer for my son, Jeff." You know, my mom was my first teacher. The next time death visited my family was in April 2023. My brother, Harry Swinton Jr., the oldest of 5 siblings, my brother, excuse me, I'm getting a little emotional. My brother was larger than life, standing 6 foot 4.5 inches, 285 pounds, a true giant and gentleman. Harry was husband and father, not to his biological, but to so many more. I can't tell you how many young adults have stories of kindness, encouragement, thought-provoking words about him. There's so much to say that I don't know where to start. But if you knew my brother Harry, you know that he loved his Oakwood College. Harry was the first elder at his church for a time. He loved to play music. He was a music director at his church in Harrison County in Houston, where he played piano, organ, bass, if you were lucky. He also preached, wrote worship songs, led many church choirs as minister of music at several different community churches he served at. Harry was a masterful negotiator, serving as an arbitrator for Harrison County in Houston. I know this is where I'm trying to bring it all together. But you know how when you are from an area, it's common knowledge that you are less recognized in your own place of origin. This is why I was surprised to hear about a proclamation in the 18th Congressional District of the United States in Texas on April 16 that would proclaim Harry Swinton Jr. Day in 2023. I believe God guided my brother's footsteps so that in this time in my life, I would not be afraid to do what I'm doing now, and that is to proclaim God's mighty deeds in my life. My brother, Harry Swinton, was a man after God's heart, and I aspire to walk in the path that he did. But death was not finished yet with my family. My father, Harry Swinton Sr., passed away this year in February. We celebrated his life in March of 23. My father was loved by many. He was so full of life and joy. You never knew at any time how much Dad was doing on your behalf. Harry Swinton Sr. was an innovator, a real change maker. Dad was a humble man with a big dream and knew how to execute them. My father left Sumter, South Carolina, after becoming an Adventist as a teen and attended Oakwood College in 1957. He didn't have much at the time, but what he did have was a big personality, and that's what fueled his ambition. Dad began his career at Oakwood College as a humble dishwasher in the cafeteria to pay for his tuition. My father was always, and my father always has said, take pride in whatever you do and do it the best of your knowledge. And that was his motto. So during the summer months, Dad did not go home for the summer break. He then took a second job at Huntsville Hospital as a janitor. Huntsville Hospital is where he met his wife-to-be, my mother of 63 years, there. My father, even with his busy schedule, always made time for family worship. One of his favorite scriptures was 1 Samuel 3:10. When Samuel answered, "Speak, for thy servant heareth." While raising a family and attending classes until he completed his bachelor's degree at Huntsville, Alabama, the University of Alabama in Huntsville, Alabama, he served in the local church where he wore many hats. First, he was first elder for a time at the First Seventh-day Adventist Church. He was deacon, treasurer, assistant choir director, hospitality director, Adventist disaster men relief. But for as long as I can remember, my father always served in church. Can you see the similarities in these lives? One common thread that I see is bringing up a child in the ways of the Lord. Proverbs 22:6, one of my father's favorite verses, he used to say all the time, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Speak your testimony.
Hey, everybody. You know me as Michael, the AV guy in the back there, so it's a little weird being here under the lights, so excuse me if I'm a little bit nervous. But it is great to see everyone here, see all your faces. You know, it's a beautiful Sabbath day, and so I'm glad that we're all together. When Jeff first asked me to come up and talk about, I guess, just my story, my testimony, not gonna lie, my initial gut reaction was like, heck no. I'm usually a little bit shy when it comes, like I said, coming up front, and I am more on the private side of people. That's why you usually don't see me too much on like social media and stuff like that. But at the same time, you know, when I prayed about it, I just had this feeling within me that I was like, you know what? Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should come out of my, my comfort zone, crawl out of my shell a little bit, kind of just share my story and my journey with you guys. So to understand where I am today, we have to go back to, I guess, the beginning of where I came from. So just for a quick reference, I am a pastor's kid. My mom and my dad have been involved in ministry even before I was alive, and I grew up entirely in the church. So I haven't really known my life without that. And so being a pastor's kid, there's certain pros and cons to that, not going to lie. I know that the Hodgins children will sympathize on that, and anyone else who's a PK here in the audience as well, too. In the fact that, everyone recognizes you. People come up to you and start talking to you, and you have no idea, who are you? I have no idea who you are, but you're acting like you know me and stuff like that, and it's because of, who your mom and dad are. But also at the same time, you kind of have this pressure, right? This pressure to, I don't know if this is the right word, to perform, to be good. You always have eyes on you, right? So anything that you do reflects on your parents. Anything that your parents do reflects on you, whether you're at school or at church or just hanging out with your friends or anywhere else in the community. And so, like I said, going back to kind of how I got here, starting way back from when I was growing up as a kid, I had a pretty nomadic childhood growing up. My dad, when he became a pastor after he left seminary, he really, really felt this burden to be a church planner. He would go to wherever the North American division would send him, and he would just literally just start up a church wherever there wasn't any. And so because of that, I ended up living in a lot of different places growing up. I distinctly remember living in Michigan, Nebraska twice, Florida 3 separate times, Colorado, Massachusetts, and then finally post-college Tennessee, and then finally here in North Carolina. So you could say I've been around the block a few times in that regard. As a kid, specifically in Florida, one of the times we lived there, we lived in a place called Fort Lauderdale. Now, I know a lot of you guys are probably familiar with that, or you know some people who have been in that area. Basically, the church that my dad planted there, he did so from the ground up because he was really, really big into small groups. I think small groups are absolutely essential to the growth of any church, especially a new and growing one. And they don't necessarily have to be Bible studies either, right? Obviously, that's great, and that has its place. We always do need groups that are focused on, hey, let's get together, let's dive deep in the Bible, let's get more spiritually mature together as brothers and sisters in Christ. But small groups can also be something just as easy as like, hey, let's work out together, or hey, let's go play some golf together, or hey, why don't the ladies go and do like a self-defense class together, right? Just things to just spend time hanging out with your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And so something that really stood out to me as a little kid during our time there was just how effective that was in growing the church. In literally just over 2 years, my dad grew a church from nothing to over 250 people just because of small groups, purely. Every weekend, we would host a Saturday night Bible study where people would come and they would do that, right? But then everyone knew after the Bible study was over, it was time to hang out. It was like, hey, let's spend some time together, let's eat. We had a pool at the house, so the kids would all bring their swimsuits and stuff. And so it was very, very common for people to not even leave our house on Saturday nights until like 1, 2 in the morning. Like, it was definitely some very, very good memories for me as a kid growing up, right? Now, to me, though, as a kid, not being very spiritually mature, I just loved it from the social aspect of things, right? So I didn't really truly maybe appreciate it from the angle that I should have. But again, I was a kid. I was in, 1st through 3rd grade during my time there. And so, I just loved it because I was like, hey, I had my friends over all the time and stuff like that, right? So, seeing that be so effective now that I look back as I'm older, I was like, wow, like I was totally missing the point. Obviously, like I said, I was a little kid at the time, but, there's probably something that I was kind of missing there that I probably should have appreciated more and kind of took for granted. From there, from Florida, we moved out to Colorado. Now, if any of you guys ever been out there or know anything about Colorado, it's an awesome state. A lot of cool things to do, especially if you're outdoorsy at all. Definitely one of my favorite places to live growing up as a kid. But during my time there was a significant event that kind of started my own journey of wanting to potentially make this whole Christianity deal my faith by my own choice, right? And so the reason why I say that is because when you grow up in the church, whether you're a PK or not, a lot of times because you have to go to church because it's what your parents tell you, it is more so you're doing it just to make them happy and that they don't yell at you, right? You don't want to disappoint them. You don't want to have to argue and fight every weekend about, I don't want to go to church. It's lame. Like, there's no one there. Especially for me growing up, because of church plants, I was often the only kid in the church plant for over a year or more. So it's like all my friends were adults. I had to be friends with older people because there was no one my age. So there was, like I said, this incident that involved my dog growing up as a kid. He was a black lab retriever. I named him Shadow. If you guys know Homeward Bound, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, I love that dog. Like I said, he was the dog of my childhood. He was an awesome dog. We got him there. It was an awesome time. But there was this incident where I took him to the park one time that was right across from our street in the neighborhood there. And I got the bright idea one day of, like, I got tired of just throwing like a tennis ball, right? He would go chase it. I got tired one time of throwing it, so I was like, I'm going to be, kind of slick with it this time. And so I'm going to start doing this thing where I bounce it off the ground and then I hit it with a metal baseball bat, right? Because I was really into baseball growing up as a kid, so I played a lot. And so I did that a couple times. It was working out great. I was hitting them way farther than I could throw them, and the dog was loving it, going back and forth, chasing it, right? Well, so Shadow decided to be slick with it one time, and he's like, hey, instead of running to chase the ball, why don't I get the ball when he bounces it? So I do that one time, right? I bounce it, I rear back, and the dog rushes in. And to my horror, my swing is coming through, and boom, slap him right upside the face with my metal bat. And it was hard. Like, it knocked him flat. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, I just beat on this dog with a metal bat. I literally felt like the worst person, like the smallest person you could be in that moment. And it was terrible. And I was crying, and I was like, I didn't know what to do. And so I ran quickly. I had to carry him because he was so dazed. I had to carry him back home. And I was telling my mom and dad, I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't mean to do this. It's totally an accident. We took him to the vet. And the vet was like, yeah, you broke his jaw, and you also completely sheared off one of his canines from that. And I was like, oh my goodness, again, I'm feeling so low, and I literally didn't know what to do. And my mom, bless her heart, right, she's trying to comfort me the best that she can, and she's like, hey, why don't we just start praying? I was like, praying? I don't feel like praying right now. I feel like the worst kind of person. Why would God ever want to talk to someone who just beat on one of his precious animals, And so one of the things that really stood out to me in that vet office was that the vet came back to us, right, and he said that the jaw would probably never heal properly, and that the tooth would rot out and fall out eventually, right, because there was just so much damage to it. The root was exposed and everything. So in that moment, in that office, when it was just me and my mom, we were waiting for the results back from the vet, I prayed probably the hardest little prayer that a little kid in fourth grade could pray to try and be like, hey, Lord, help be with my animal. I'm so sorry for this. I didn't mean to do this, right? And I prayed. I was like, please help him with his jaw, and that for his tooth not to rot out. And so the vet came back, gave us those results. It was kind of definitive, okay, well, we know this is what's going to happen, right? So lo and behold, 3-4 months afterwards, we go to take the dog back for another visit for the vet, just so that way they can check in on things. And the vet was completely amazed when they did the x-rays. The jaw had completely healed, and the tooth never fell out. And I was like, oh my goodness, as a little fourth grader, I can't believe, God answered my prayer that everything came out okay. He came back to, he had a flawless mouth, and, even the tooth was permanently halved, right? So always a reminder of what happened. But, it sealed itself over somehow, and it never fell out. And he had a normal life. I didn't, permanently ruin him or anything like that. And so that really stood out to me at my time there in Colorado. Then after my dad's mission in Colorado had finished, we moved to Nebraska, where I spent my 6th through 8th grade years there. This was an interesting instance where my dad had decided to take a break from church planting, and he decided to just be an actual formal pastor of a church. So we went to this church called Northside, where he became the head pastor there. And at first, things were great. Things were going smooth. The people really loved having a new pastor that was young, because their previous pastor had just died of old age. He was crazy old at the time. So they were really happy to get someone who, had some life and vitality in again. So excuse me, I have some notes here if you guys don't mind. So Nebraska for me was kind of a roller coaster of faith time in my life. And the reason I say that is because I had some really high highs and some really low lows. The high highs were that, do any of you guys do you guys remember when the movie by Mel Gibson, The Passion, came out? That was during that time period. Now, obviously, not the best film necessarily to show young kids due to the graphic nature of it. But my dad was like, hey, it's Christian, we're good. So I went and saw him, and I went and saw it with him in the theater there. And something about that movie, like I know it has a very specific spin on it, and because of who the director is and stuff like that. But just the simple act of like seeing the story of Jesus, which I had read about so many times before in all my, kids' Bibles. I had enacted it on plays, on skits, etc. Right? I had done all the perfect pastor's kid stuff up in the church up until that moment. But for some reason, and this is crazy to say, but that movie to me really, really sent home the aspect of like, wow, I can't believe someone would do that for me. And I remember distinctly in the movie theater, right? People were walking in, they had their buckets of popcorn, their drinks, their gummies. People were laughing and joking and eating really loudly, like typical people do on with most movies, right? I distinctly remember, literally by the time the movie was only half over, it was dead silent in the theater. No one was laughing, no one was eating. Everyone was like hyper focused because it's intense, right? That last week of Jesus' life is very, very intense and it's very personal, right? And I remember on the drive home, after finishing the movie with my dad, we were both just dead silent. And then suddenly I just started bawling. I was like, wow, like, again, I can't believe that someone would go through all of that kind of stuff, right, for me, for someone who didn't even deserve it. Like, I didn't do anything that would have anyone show that kind of love, that sort of, personal outreach to me, right? And so, like I said, I know, again, it's a silly film to think that something like that could have such a large impression, but at least for me, at my, age there, it really did stand out to me. And it was actually not long after that I finally announced to my dad that I wanted to become baptized. And so I made sure that my baptism date would be on the same day that when he was a younger man, when he decided to become a Christian, because I felt like that'd be kind of special for him. So he got to baptize me on his anniversary of being a Christian for over like 20 years. So like I said, again, some really, really good spiritual highs. Unfortunately, we come to the spiritual low points. And there was, unfortunately, after about 2 years of being at the Northside SCI Church there in Lincoln, Nebraska, specifically, there was a schism slowly increasing in the church over the way that the church should be run, how the worship service should be held. And so you kind of had like the old guard who were very like, no, we only do it this way, and this is the only way we do it, because if we do it any other way, then it's heretical. And then you have some newer people who are starting to come in, thanks to the efforts that my dad had been doing, because again, his biggest thing is small groups, and that always brings in people. And so this rift started growing and growing and growing in the church. Unfortunately, the devil has this really, really sneaky way of getting in under your skin, right? Making it very, very subtle where you don't notice it at first, because, right, if he comes at you hot and heavy, just immediately, boom, you put up the shield of faith, right, and you're good to go. But he's very, very good at making it so that way you don't notice things at first. You don't notice that things are starting to kind of be corrupted a little bit rotten at the core, right, and until it's too late oftentimes. And so, like I said, unfortunately, this rift started growing and growing, and it came to a head where at the point, the head elder at that church, which we were very, very good friends with at the time because they had even housed us for a couple months before we found a house for ourselves to live in, he ultimately went above my dad and went to the conference and asked for him to be removed from the church. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to say any sort of like commentary or criticism of Adventism, right? That's not my goal here, but this is just plainly putting out the facts of what did happen, right? And so, unfortunately, due to that incident, ultimately did lead to my dad getting asked to leave the church. Not like leave the church, but like not be the pastor of the church there anymore, right? And so, again, if you guys are more interested in the story, I'm more than willing to go in depth on you if you guys are curious and stuff like that. But just to keep moving on, that was a huge low point for me because I felt like everything I had known, everything I had trusted, everyone that I knew there it felt like a huge betrayal, right? Especially because of some of our closest friends were now the same people who were pointing fingers at us. And so that really, again, like I said, that kind of describes, it's a perfect example of how I feel like my whole personal journey has been a faith roller coaster, right? Again, really high highs, really low lows. I unfortunately have never really felt like I've ever been in any sort of like super stable plateau of faith, right? And again, I don't know if even that is the goal ultimately or not, but that's kind of been, like I said, a great example of how overall my life journey has been. So from Nebraska there, we went back down to Florida, this time in Fort Myers. That would encompass most of my high school years. High school was interesting for me, especially coming off the heels of that betrayal there in Nebraska. I definitely kind of took it as a time to like just explore and have fun and like change who I was as a person. I think I definitely slipped away a little bit from my faith in God during that time, and that was mainly because of the influences that I allowed to come into my life. I made friends probably with what most people would associate as the wrong group of people. Now, obviously, again, because I am the pastor's kid, I still going to church every weekend, right? Still trying to put on that face for my parents, be the good kid that I'm supposed to. But like I said, again, high school was, it was some years where I was just trying to figure out who I was. I know a lot of people, same thing, high school, college. Those are very formative years where you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to be, right? And so for me, unfortunately, again, I ran with the wrong crowd. I got super heavy into things that I really shouldn't, did, partying and drinking and street racing and all sorts of crazy stuff like that, right? Of course, my parents never knew, but, and if they were here now, they would be aghast otherwise. So hopefully they're not watching. But it's all water under the bridge now. But yeah, so again, sorry, hold on, let me just look at my notes real quick. So the interesting thing about my high school there was that even though it was technically a Christian school, it was not specifically Adventist. It was just non-denominational, right? Like we had chapels, we prayed, we talked about Jesus, we had a Bible class, stuff like that, right? But in general, it wasn't any specific denomination. It was me and one other person were the only Adventists in that entire school, and this is a school of 2,500 kids. So yeah. And of course, the other person who wasn't Adventist went to my church. So it was like very small world in that regard. But yeah, so once high school concluded, I was looking at colleges, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. And this is where my dad had a really hard talk with me where he was explaining to me that he really wanted me to get back into Adventist education. And that was hard for me to accept because I had my eyes on a couple of other colleges where I didn't really care if they were Christian or not at that point, because I was just looking purely at like what programs they would offer for me. And so that was a really hard conversation to have and also to ultimately accept what he wanted for me, because it came to the point where he had to say, like, we're not going to help pay for it if you don't choose an Adventist college, right? You'll be totally on your own. Now, that sounds harsh, right, for a parent to not want to support their kid at that point, but it also was an indicator of showing where I was in my head and my heart at that time, where I was willing to go in that direction and cross that line with my parents, right? And so I think that they took it as a moment where they needed to show some tough love to try and bring me back in a little bit. So ultimately, I visited a couple of colleges. I went back out to Union to check that place out because my brother graduated from there. I checked out Andrews. I checked out Southern. I didn't check out AUC because they were in the middle of collapsing, unfortunately. And I wanted to go check out PUC as well too. But after visiting Southern, something about that place, it's really hard to describe. I don't know, I guess what people would say these days, like I felt a vibe, right? There was a certain vibe there that I couldn't deny, that there was some sort of pull to that place. And so, again, I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with Southern, but if you are, then you know all about it. And if you're not, again, you can come talk to me. I'll be happy to tell you all about it. But so Southern is in Collegedale, Tennessee, which is a place that I had never really been except for going to Gatlinburg. Which is really cool, by the way, if you guys are looking for a cheap vacation. But so Southern was a reset button on my life. more so starting in sophomore year. Freshman year, I was a little bit more of the same, kind of being the crazy person that I was in high school. I did really poorly on my grades. I lost a bunch of my scholarships, unfortunately, because of the bad grades, which again, another hard talk with my parents, which kind of sucked. But it was really the summer between freshman and sophomore year where I actually ended up working at Camp Nasoka. That was an interesting experience for me because working there put me into a position where I had to actively share my faith, which at the time, as little as it was, I'm unfortunate to admit that, but that's the truth of it there, to little kids, right? And so in the process of sharing that, trying to put on that brave face to the kids, something kind of stirred within me, like, hey, like, if I'm saying this to the kids, like, I should actually believe it too, right? I can't just be lying to them if I don't even believe it myself. And so that summer, I think, really started me back down the journey of like, hey, like, I think I need to be more receptive, trying to kind of redo how I do things when it comes to church and faith and spirituality. And so, again, starting in sophomore year of college, that was where I really just kind of hit like a big reset button on my life. I completely discarded my old friend group that I originally built up during freshman year because, again, they were just really bad influences on me. And that was really, really hard. I had a lot of hard talks with God through prayer about that because I thought that these were going to be like my ride or die friends, right? Everyone says, oh, the friends you make in college are the friends you make for life. Not necessarily my case, unfortunately. I think I can count maybe on one hand the number of people I still talk to today, unfortunately, but that's just how life is. So from there, that was also when, like I was saying, I kind of started taking my faith and spirituality more seriously. I did make one friend who kind of stuck with me through all of that, and he kind of saw the change that was going on in me, and he was like, hey, like, you're different somehow when I came back from that summer. It's like, what's different? So I kind of explained to him some of the feelings that I had and what had transpired over the summer and stuff like that. And I wasn't trying to do any sort of like life-changing lecture to him or anything like that, but apparently he later admitted to me like that was really, really profound for him to hear that of me because he knew exactly how I was during freshman year to now. And he's like, wow, like I can't believe someone would undergo that large of a change. Like, do you mind if like, we do like Bible studies together? Do you mind if we like act as like accountability partners to make sure that we're, staying on the straight and narrow as much as we can? And so that for me was like a huge, again, moment like, wow, God, like this is awesome, spiritual high, really hitting that high point there. So later on through college, I met Shelby, again, working at summer camp, and you guys all know how that ended up. I've got 2 kids now, so. Again, if you guys want to hear that story, just come talk to me after church. I'll be more than happy to tell it, but I know I'm probably taking up too much time here. So right out of college, I needed to get a job because I got married right after I got graduated. And so, because I had someone else to support. And so our early marriage there was really, really tough because she was still going to school, and I was just finding jobs here and there, left and right, where I could. Unfortunately, starting out as a graphic designer, a lot of the jobs were not very high paying just because the jobs that I could get with the amount of experience I had, you really only just got super basic ones. Like my first job out of college was for a screen printing and embroidery business, and I worked for $12 an hour, and that's not very much these days. So had a series of unfortunate events where I had to go from one job to the next, either because like the company either went under or I got fired for whatever reason due to like company politics or like making a mistake or things of that nature, right? And so we struggled financially, unfortunately, because of that. At first we were like, oh yeah, this is great. We got our own place. We're living our life. We're on our own. But unfortunately, due to that, we had to move back with her parents, right? And so for me personally, as someone who wanted to, be the man, provide, like, I can, treat my wife to all this awesome stuff, right? That felt like a huge blow. And that really, again, started kind of dragging me back down this path of just apathy and almost, not necessarily depression, but like the step above that when it came to like, thinking like, oh man, like, if God is really this amazing person, like he wouldn't let me, go through this struggle and trouble, especially because of like all the things I had experienced in my life up to that point, right? And so yeah, like we had to, move back in with our parents, and that was rough because that's not our own space. I found another great job. We moved back out again, and unfortunately lost that one again. So we had to move back into her parents again. So not only did we have to do that once, but we had to do that twice. And so that really sent me over the edge. Like I distinctly remember after having to move back in with my in-laws for the second time, like I just literally told up Shelby straight up. I was like, I don't even know if I want to be a Christian anymore, because I just felt like everything at that point had been conspiring against me. I wasn't feeling anything at the church that I was going to. No one was reaching out to me. I didn't have the motivation to reach out to anyone else. I wasn't doing any sort of like Bible study or a quiet time or anything like that, right? Because I didn't feel anything at all. And I think sometimes almost being apathetic is worse than either being hot or cold, right? It even says in the Bible, God wishes that we were either hot or cold, but being lukewarm is the worst, and he'll spit you out of his mouth, right? So I was just completely apathetic about everything. From there, after the latest job that I had lost, unfortunately, that was when Shelby finally finished her degree for being a teacher, right? So she was looking for jobs, hunting for places to look at, and we were looking at places like, Charlotte, Raleigh, Columbia, back in Collegedale, Tennessee, right? Just a whole bunch of stuff in the Southeast, because she wanted to stay close to her family, right? And so I remember distinctly one day she got a call from ACA, and they wanted to interview her for a job to be a teacher. And the great thing about that is that literally the day before I had gotten fired from my most recent job, I made a mistake, cost some money, a couple grand, but like I said, again, if you're curious, I'm more than willing to tell you that story because it's crazy. But and so the timing on that was kind of like, okay, it sounds a little too convenient for my liking, but we'll run with it, right? And so she interviews and she gets the job, and we're like, wow, okay, like I can't believe it. Like normally we had always moved for my job, right? Because that was a pre-COVID world, right? Where like you had to be in the office every day, right? Nowadays you can be at home and do whatever you want, basically, but. But yeah, so then, she got the job offer, and it's like, wow, we're going to Charlotte. Like, I can't believe this is working out. So we went to Charlotte, and, she started her job at ACA, and we were just hunting for a church family to be a part of. Again, like I said, I was still kind of in this just total apathetic mood around church and spirituality. Then... Yeah.
So, clearly, Proverbs 22:6. Bring up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from you. Correct?
Yeah.
That sounds like your life in a nutshell.
Yeah, so far, yeah. I got more years than you, Jeff.
A few more years
Yeah.
in the church?
Well, no, I mean in life.
That's good, Michael.
But yeah, so we did the whole church hopping thing, just like Edgar and Jess did earlier, just kind of see where we would kind of find home per se, right? And then one day we were at Sharon, and someone came up to us, was like, "Hey, just letting you know, there's a young adult service that we have sometimes over at the gym in ACA." And so the very next Sabbath, we came and checked it out, and that was our first time checking out Pursuit, all the way back in 2019. And we haven't looked back since. We like I said, again, we just felt like there was something here that just wasn't at any of the other churches we had checked out. And, I immediately saw a need that they needed some help in the back. And I'd had lots of experience with that from my time helping my dad with doing all the church plants, right? So oftentimes I would be the one guy who did everything back there. And so, that was kind of what got me dug in and stable here with you guys at Pursuit. And so I wish I could say it's been smooth sailing since then. Unfortunately, as a lot of you may know, I just recently had a very tumultuous time here where I lost my job that I had last year. Again, just through circumstances that are outside of my control. And for the first time in my life, which is kind of sad to say because I'm 33 years old now at this point, but for the first time in my life, this most recent time of struggle and financial stress and trying to find a job so I could support my family, I think was the first time I can honestly say, and like I said, again, I feel really vulnerable here mentioning this, but where I honestly kind of took this challenge and this storm in my life head on in faith. Every single day I was reading my Bible, I was doing quiet time, I was, listening to, Christian music to uplift myself when I was driving around as opposed to the usual stuff I normally listen to, and just really, really trying to stay in touch with my faith. I remember reaching out to Ryan during that time period where I was kind of telling him my struggles, where my whole life I've had high highs and then super low lows and then nothing in between. And so he gave me this book, and I think I have the title of it here in case you guys are curious. It is called, hold on, Steps to Personal Revival. That was a really hard book for me to read. Not because physically reading it was hard. I like reading, but the issues that it touched on and the things it pointed out, unfortunately, were some of the ugliest aspects of my spiritual journey that I hated to admit to myself. And so that really, really opened my eyes to man, I really need to make a change. And so through that, like I mentioned earlier, I really made a hard concerted effort, and to the sacrifice of even doing things that I wanted, or going out and hanging out with friends, or watching movies or whatever, right? Just doing things that I wanted to do for myself. I made a conscientious effort to make time for my walk with God. And I would like to say that I've been blessed now and rewarded for that by getting through this journey. I wasn't as stressed as I normally was. I wasn't as worried about how to support my family as I normally was. And I think my faith, instead of sinking, grew stronger. And ultimately, I now have a job again. And now I can support my family. And I don't have to worry about those things for right now. So again, like I said, it's just a huge blessing to know that, I again, for the first time in my life, I really, really took on that storm in my life, and with the proper attitude and the right way to go about it. And I don't think I'm ever going to go back from that.
Amen.
So,
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate your testimony. It's 3 different testimonies that we've heard here today. But recently I heard another testimony, and I was so excited to have it shared with you all and prepared to interview that individual, because when it was so fantastic to hear him speak of how God had spoke to him at a young age, a young man, and asked him to follow him. But that's not my story to tell. And it seems to me right at this moment that God wanted for me to be here. And have you ever heard of the saying, in all things God will be glorified? In all things, God will be glorified. I believe he is showing me through Psalm 71:15, Psalm 71, verse 15 through 18. He's showing me how God has brought me along this life's journey. I'm one of the few in pursuit who verse 18 is talking about. Oh, as you see, I'm almost falling. Old age is something else. This years. I got up this morning and I was walking out to the truck, and I took a step, and all of a sudden I heard a pop. My leg is literally killing me right now. So I've been sitting and I've been nervous because a lot of you don't know this is my first time ever presenting in front of any audience this large. Very nervous, very uncomfortable, but I want to finish, and I'm reading everything. I'm one of the few members that verse 18 is talking about, with these old days and gray hair. Wouldn't you agree? But seriously, I was truly running from the Lord. For years, God kept me as I denied him when I was going my own way. I was gone for 20 years out of the church. For 20 years. I thought as I became a young adult, that I needed to go out, play drums, go drink, go smoke. I needed to do all of that. I thought that's what I wanted to do. I was truly running from the Lord. But for years, God kept me as I denied him. And you know, it's funny, but not in a ha-ha way. I learned my lesson, and I was able to return to the Lord, my Lord and Savior, with more knowledge, understanding than I could have ever imagined. Amen. After 20 years, I returned to God, a humble man willing to allow God to put the broken pieces back together. Even with losses of my family, I can see God being glorified. I have not lost my way. I have not gone astray because of the examples that my parents and my brother and my family gave.
Amen.
I know God has a plan for me, and I must proclaim his glory. After all that, I know he has asked me to work in his ministry, and now I have the opportunity to work in his kingdom. So verse 18, so even to old age and gray hair, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all those to come. I stand before you, a changed man, not without fault, but washed in the redeeming blood of Jesus Christ, who died for my sins. I, along with my friends, we are living testimonies. Thank you.